Hi, everyone. I'm your second moderator, Michael Beirut, and I want to thank Jennifer and Bobby for inviting me to join them in helping with this fantastic conference. I've had a really great time so far. It's wonderful to be having this in New York, and we have a very New York flavored sequence coming up for you right now. I'm going to start by asking, how many people here work like in-house at a large organization? Raise your hand. Lots of people. Okay. So our next two guests both work for very large organizations. They are designers within those organizations, but they are just a small group of designers serving a bunch of people who are not designers, who some of you might call stakeholders where you come from. They have to answer to those stakeholders and keep them happy. Coincidentally, they both inherited brand identities that they did not create. So they're just executing an existing brand identity in a way that satisfies all these demanding people who are not designers and are just kind of like, you know, being demanding and not designers all the time. That may sound familiar to some of you. What's exciting about our two guests is that they work for two of New York City's greatest cultural treasures. I don't know if you've had time to go to any museums while you're here in New York, if you're from out of town, but they are part of what makes New York an amazing place to live and work and spend time in and visit. And part of what makes those experiences great is the work that Alicia and Hilary do. So I'm going to tell you who they are and then invite them to come out. We're going to have a conversation. Alicia Cheng is head of design at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She's a graphic designer, an educator. She was a founding partner of a firm called Management that was, and a very successful and very visible firm here in town called Management. And then also originated and published books, like one I bet you may have seen. It was from 2020 called What Democracy Looked Like, a survey of ballot design, an indispensable document for anyone who values the voting process. She received her BA from Barnard College and her MFA from Yale University. She joined the Met over 2 years ago. She oversees a department of 31 people. And anyone here been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art yet? Yeah, you can raise your hand. The Met's been around forever. It's the one with the stairs and the columns in Central Park on the Upper East Side. 2 million square feet, 17 different curatorial departments, 437 individual galleries, and sometimes gets up to 25,000 visitors a day on a busy weekend, and they get 7 million visitors annually. Amazing. Joining Alicia is Hilary Greenbaum. Hilary is Director of Graphic Design and Brand Creative at the Whitney Museum of American Art. She's been there since 2012. Prior to her position there, she served as staff designer and a design writer, design columnist for the New York Times Magazine. She has a BFA from Carnegie Mellon, MFA from the California Institute of the Arts. The world of the Whitney is amazing. The graphic design department there is 16 years old, has 6 full-time employees, a project manager, a senior designer, interaction designer, et cetera. They work on hundreds of projects a year. How many people have been to the Whitney? Raise your hand. Yeah. You can clap for the Whitney too. Thank you. Both of these places are, if you visit them, they look like dream jobs. But so many things look like dream jobs from the outside. And the way I describe them initially is, these are taxing, hard, challenging projects that come in for in-house departments that have to turn things around quickly, do them right, and at the same time kind of honor both the spirit of the institutions they represent and, most importantly, be magnetic, experience shaping, devices for all the visitors that come to these places. We're really fortunate to have Alicia and Hilary with us to talk about how they do what they do. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming them to the AIGA main stage.
That was very nice. Thank you.
Okay, so Hilary and Alicia. So there's not going to be any super titles up there in the screen. Yeah. I'd like to ask both of you the same question just to get started. Do you remember the first time you were ever in a museum, Hilary?
I grew up in New Jersey. I think we were bussed in to go to the Met, actually. I think that might have been my first large museum.
Like what grade were you in?
4th, 5th grade, maybe?
4th grade, 5th grade. Do you remember how the Met struck you?
Large.
It's large enough. I could ask Alicia to do this, but can you describe what that entrance hall is like as a visitor? Yeah, I'm gonna have your visitor describe it.
If I can recall, it was intimidating.
Yeah.
It felt like there was a lot going on coming from a place that's not as crowded as New York. It felt like a lot, but exciting.
Yeah. And Alicia, how about you?
I grew up going to museums at a very young age. My mother was a painter, and she taught at the University of Michigan, so I would go often. And it was always a place where, another museum. So the correlation between that and being extremely bored was strong for a while. But I think the moment where I started to look closely, where my mother was trying to describe what she was seeing, and finally you were so bored, you were paying attention, is where I really locked in. And it was at the Met, not to sound corny, but it was a show in Vuillard, and that I remember and I recall now going there every day to work.
You describe your own experience as visitors to a place, and you couldn't have imagined then that was where you'd end up at such a place like the Met or the Whitney. When you look out and you see the visitors, say in the main hall of the Met, or the people kind of clustering down in the streets of the meatpacking district on their way to the Whitney, is there a prototypical visitor that you're imagining? Who do you think is coming, and how is that theory shaping the work that you do?
I'll take this one first because it's a very relevant question to sort of what the visitor personas are. So what, say, maybe certain curators would hope for as a visitor, what you see on the floor, what you see internationally, et cetera. It's all affected by the different sort of demographic. But the times that I've seen visitors, as you're following them through the galleries and overhearing things, it can be quite hilarious and quite moving, where you see small children just sort of staring in wonder, or people who literally have never been to a museum. And I worked the front desk, the visitor information desk, for a little while, and people were like, I've never been to a museum, what should I see first? And it's a great moment to be able to be part of that experience for them. So it runs the absolute gamut.
Yeah.
Same. It could be anyone, really. I like to imagine designing for the person that got dragged there, though. I like to imagine the person that didn't intend to be there, and how the work we do can help them feel more comfortable seeing challenging works of art.
The two institutions are they represent different legacies, I would say. Almost, I would say different premises about what a museum is, right? That's accurate, right? Can you just describe, Hilary, what the idea of the creation of the Whitney was, and how it sort of came to be where it is now?
I'll do a short version of our founding. So Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney is the founder of the Whitney. She was an artist in her own right about 100 years ago, and got frustrated that no one was paying attention to American art. So she started collecting the work of her peers and amassed a collection of about 500 works of art, and went to the Met and said, hey, look at what I've done. Isn't it awesome? And the Met said, no, thank you. And so the Whitney began. So thanks for that.
As I recall, the Whitney started in some little space that was almost a little bit like a gallery that where Mrs. Whitney would host salons in a way,
yes,
right?
It was like a club, and then it's moved a few times in its history. It was downtown, and then it went uptown, and now we're back downtown.
Yeah. And so in contrast, the Met is sort of, at least in its formative years, it sort of represented the establishment, if something like the Whitney would have been the upstart, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we recently had 150th anniversary, actually 2020, not just great timing for that. But so that kind of August history in terms of like the founding of New York, Central Park being half developed, like it's really quite something to think of the Met as an institution architecturally and its first establishment with, say, the New York Public Library also, Natural History Museum's the same kind of era. But yeah, I mean, with that kind of history and sort of landmark status, it does feel like an incredibly impactful history that at this moment within that trajectory, it really is an interesting way to contextualize one's own work.
Yeah, and I think both of those legacies actually get expressed very economically in the logos of the two institutions, if I can call it that. I mean, if I can just even reduce it right to that. And if you go to the gift shop, you'll find them so reduced, as is a requirement of doing work for any cultural institution now, right? Can you talk about the, and as I said when I introduced you, both those logos are fairly recent. When the two of you arrived respectively on your scenes, the institutions had gone through some physical changes that kind of provoked a reconsideration of their graphic identities. External consultant firms did both of them, and we can talk about Wolf Olins doing the Met and Experimental Jet Set doing the Whitney. But then both of them were sort of like, I assume given with sort of like an operating instructions to whomever would, end up being the operator of these things, right? And so, can you talk a little bit about what it's like to kind of work in a context like that? Is it inhibiting? Is it inspiring? What do you feel is what do you feel kind of, I'm taking advantage and getting very nerdy and just kind of talking about like logos, but I apologize for that. You're talking about the moving power of art, but I mean, just like, let's talk about logos just for a second. So.
Yeah, I think when I came on at the Met, the brand was about 8 years old. Yeah. And, it was on the shoulders of Susan Sellers, who pushed it through with Wolf Olins. And I could see, it's a pretty complex, large-scale institution. So establishing the brand in and of itself was one huge challenge, and then the implementation also still. So for what they achieved from then to now, I really appreciated that progress for sure. But it's definitely the mantle of the office I now occupy to be the steward of the brand, to maintain. And for a lot of people out there who are doing the same for their own work, it's not that fun to be sort of like the bad cop all the time. Like human beings want to have flexibility and agency, and you're sort of often feeling like you're kind of like, no, you can't do that, it's not part of the rules. No. But you're trying to make us all ostensibly look like one institution. So that's also kind of a hard play. Yeah. Sort of like, how, municipal governance is hard to do universally. So that is a lot of the mandate that I see now, but also the sort of moment where sort of pressure testing, like it has endured for the 8 years. Fundamentally, I think there's less about the form and more about the relevance. Like, we can take Breuer off and we're sort of doing a little refresh, but fundamentally it's not a redesign by any means.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that struck me about the logo when it was unveiled is that it didn't say the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it didn't even say Met, it said the Met, T-H-E-M-E-T. And I thought that was actually astonishingly familiar and casual in a way about an institution that from the exterior looks like nothing, does not look neither casual nor kind of like low-key. It's imposing. But I assume that's a deliberate choice.
I think it was a lot of the effort, and I can't speak to the groundwork that happened, but sort of accessibility, the idea that, your experience going into the Great Hall can be imposing. There's nothing one can do to necessarily soften that architectural impact, which I have to say lends itself to sort of grandeur in a good way, kind of sets yourself up for sort of wonder. But I think that effort to be more, and shortening it does not do the trick for sure. It comes with a lot more programmatic offerings, et cetera. But I think that effort to make it a little bit more, acknowledge the sort of short form that we were using maybe as native New Yorkers, but even outside sort of as the Met So I think it was a useful switch.
Yeah. And Hilary, when I moved to New York, the Whitney was uptown in a building on Madison Avenue. That confusingly, the Met briefly took over, and as an extension of its main Fifth Avenue museum. Right. If you know, you know, and if you don't try not to get too confused about it. But then it, the Whitney now is in a decidedly modern building down in the decidedly modern neighborhood of West Chelsea, or the Meatpacking District, and it has a logo that is flexible, malleable, dynamic, and I'm continually surprised at how it came with a mandate that a single typeface would be used with it in a single case. It's always what I assume is either Helvetica or Neuhaus Grotesque or some such thing, in all caps, in a single weight, as I've seen it all the time. And I think if you were interviewing for a job and they said, it's a great job, really visible, really exciting, you can do whatever you want. By the way, you can only use this one typeface. You can't even use the lowercase letters in the typeface. It has different weights. Forget about those different weights.
Challenge accepted.
and weirdly enough, it has to represent everything from Edward Hopper to, you know what I mean? It has to represent things that, the history of it's a museum of modern art, but modern by that definition goes further back than the rise of sans serif typefaces like Helvetica. So I know that didn't give you pause, or did it?
No, I mean, I was coming from an environment, I'd already been working in-house for 5 years at a place that only had 2 typefaces. So why not just have one? So I think it's challenging in one way, and there's definitely internal pushback at times, like, oh, why can't we use a serif every now and again? And sometimes we do if an artist has a really strong attachment to a particular typeface on the title wall. But for the most part, we do not, because it's all speaking to that same challenge of speaking with one institutional voice. Regardless of when a work is made, we're looking at it right now. We're looking at it with the lens of today and through a particular venue that also comes with its own opinions about it, which is what you see when you read the text. So in a way, it's a challenge, but that's our typographic challenge as a team, is to continually make that relevant, continually make that work interesting, have it be contextual, and doing that with one face is hard, but that's on us.
Yeah, you used the word challenge, and that was going to be my next question, actually. And both of you have alluded to, subtly, to the different kind of forces that you have to respond to in doing your work. Can you sort of describe what a typical project looks like, and kind of talk about what makes it, quote unquote, easy and fun versus, quote, challenging? What are the characteristics that you've learned set you up and set you and your teams up for success, and what are the things that you realize are sort of things you have to proceed more cautiously in terms of, I'm using a lot of euphemisms. You in-house people know what I'm talking about, though. You get a call from one department, it's always fun working with them. You get a call from another department, it's always like 20 million revisions, and they're not paying a penny for it, so they can always ask for 20 million more, right? So. But we don't talk like that at the Met and the Whitney.
We're like, we love them all. Yes, we love them all equally.
Yeah, but like, what are the characteristics of a challenging project? When you sort of think, brace yourself, we might be in for some work on this one.
I think, in the best scenario, you get people who come to the design department, and again, the in-house factor, is something that's not to be overlooked, because, you are there within the museum at the disposal of everyone who needs your services. So there's an inherent assumption of being responsive that can be challenging at times when you're trying to sort of leverage your point of view and your expertise. So I would say if a curator can come with an open mind and a sense of trust to what we can add to the project. But the sheer volume of what we manage is also by virtue of the fact that there's a lot of people who work at the Met, and there are a lot of curators who've been incubating this project for sometimes 5-7 years. So by the time it gets to design, they are ready to go, and they've had a lot of time to think about things. So that can be a great thing, where somebody's meeting you sometimes more than halfway, but that can be all right. And then the sort of iteration and that kind of element, can be very fun. But there's a lot of parameters for object conservation, for security, for accessibility, all these things to make it within, a visitor experience that is well considered. Council is a huge active player in a lot of our work. So getting that to the finish line with some aspects of your original ideation can be the sort of triumph and the joy. Yeah. So within that broader outline, there's certainly calibrations within each stage, but I think all of us kind of understand where those pitfalls can lie.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned trust, which seems like the important thing. What are the things you use to engender trust amongst these parties?
It's a lot of, I don't know, there's not one key. For me, it's a lot of engagement. Like really hearing deeply for what their sources are, what their inspirations are, et cetera, and like really listening to them. And I think from my personal opinion, like that kind of engagement can help conversations throughout the project rather than necessarily coming on harder in terms of like, this is how design sees it and pushing that agenda. But it's more of a collaborative meeting of minds. Yeah. And I don't use that word lightly because I think it gets tossed around a lot. But I think with that collaboration becomes with that listening and good communication that can enable a better, healthier relationship.
Yeah. Does that ring true for you, Hilary?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like we have limitations on one end in trying to have consistency with the brand, and numerous departments that all individually, I'm sure anyone in-house hears this challenge, individually want to be seen as separate and different and special. And trying to balance those two things continuously without kind of sacrificing one or the other, like hearing their challenges, trying to understand their challenges. I don't presume to know intimately like the work that the other teams that I work with have. They all have their own areas of expertise, and I respect that and appreciate that. But trying to kind of balance that it's not just us serving them, but us helping each other to serve the Whitney.
Yeah.
And I would actually recall the sort of visitor experience too. That can also, surprisingly, you think that we're only visitor centered and everyone at each institution is thinking about that, but I think it can get a little bit clouded when you have different agendas and you're trying to like inject some level of design in there too, and then, oh yeah, like it doesn't matter if there's like 400 words on the wall kind of thing. Like, should they always keep all of those elements in balance?
Mm-hmm.
So if I were someone who had an in-house position and I was surrounded by people, I was a lonely island surrounded by people who were all just business people, number crunchers, concerned with manufacturing, concerned with sales, and I was like the one designer, I'd feel lonely, and I'd yearn to think, what if I had clients who were really visually acute, who were like, PhDs in art history or curators or things like that? Wouldn't that be great? Is there a downside to that? Do your,
boy, Michael.
I mean, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yes.
It's not like you can say, stand back. I'm the most aesthetically aware person in the room. Mr. Curator or Ms. Curator who has 40 years of experience with this realm of art. You have to,
Let's just say it's a high level of discussion, and that is like absolutely the best part of it. Like I kind of, when I had first meetings, I was kind of unintentionally kind of bracing to really be really persuasive and I didn't have to start there. It was like a much higher level discussion, so that part was very energizing. I think there's a certain level, like it doesn't matter where you sit. I think it's just sort of, the proof of expertise is just an awkward position. You never want to lead with like, I know what I'm talking about because I went to art school and you didn't. Like, it sounds pathetic.
They might have gone to art school.
Right, and then they're like, well, so did I, and then you have this terrible my eyeballs are better than your eyeballs.
Yeah.
It's really a bad situation. But I wish I had like, well, you need these three things to succeed with that argument. But it is proof of the work you've done and the responsiveness that you can say, well, I hear you, this is how it would reflect in our world, this is how formally we're trying to reflect it, but we're going to do it only this much because otherwise So I think it's that active translation discussion, and I think that can help people bring them along. The other thing I would say is that people like to geek out on type. So if you feel like you're working in a group where people are not understanding, like, spend the time, like, do a 101 with them. And, you know, that may
Just one.
Just one. But sort of maybe give them a taste, which could go wildly wrong, but at least they feel like they're keen on what you know, and all of a sudden, you know, they have a little bit of a peek into your expertise.
Indeed, yeah. And we had one question that came in through threads, and it was interesting. It was from, let me see, I've got it here. It's about life cycle and longevity. And it's from someone at Expedition Works who asked about designing for permanence versus designing for change. Mm-hmm. And how do you, when you're designing something, often it's a temporary exhibit, so it's not going to be there forever. But at the same time, even temporary exhibits can be wild. Then, you work within, institutional elements like, say, the Whitney Biennial, which goes back for decades and decades and decades, every 2 years, and sort of everything you do represents another, step in that long staircase, And so, like, how do you take a long-term view, and what do you watch out for as you're doing that? I'll start with Hilary on that.
I mean, we talk a lot as an industry about sustainability, and I feel like sustainability is often in the context of materiality and recycling, but I feel like sustainability is also about that question of brand longevity. If you redesign your logo or your company's design system every 3 years, like, that's not sustainable for a number of reasons. And so I like to think about it in that terms, in terms of sustainability. And I would appreciate if there was more of that, to be honest, that our challenges were not just always about creating something new, but how we can kind of use the tools of a certain brand to carry it forward and contextualize it to today. That's what I see the challenge of our team doing with this brand.
I don't know if the question was necessarily related to physical space, but I think I'll answer it through that lens, because the Met, it's an old house and it needs a lot of repair. And a lot of the galleries are undergoing, there's many permanent collections that are getting refreshed, or galleries that are getting a wholesale restoration. And, permanence as it relates to the Met, I mean, we're founded on many collections that were donated that with the stipulation that, they were meant to be set and would remain so in perpetuity. Yeah. Like, that's crazy. Like, there's nothing that seems like you can add that clause to, but so that's a lot of what the Met operates from. So by initiating projects that you want to have be more longevic, I won't say permanent, is a lot of what we're negotiating right now. So that's not to say permanent exhibitions get a different set of parameters, but I have to say we're constantly negotiating moves that we make that potential future use, sort of making sure that it's flexible enough for, the next group of people who will inherit our mantle.
Yeah. So last question, and this is the one you get all the time, I apologize, but it was the first question I wrote down here actually was, if someone had time on Sunday to go to the Met,
the Whitney?
Or I'm gonna ask you first, the Met, they're gonna have time to go to both, of course.
They'd have to, yeah.
And you know where they won't go? MoMA. Guggenheim, because they're not in the house, so we don't care about them.
They're not on the sofa right now.
They're not on the sofa. If you're not on the sofa, you don't get to hype your joint, I guess. So, what should they see? What's the one thing?
At the Met?
Yeah, at the Met. Where would you send them first?
Well, right now, the Manet Degas show is quite excellent. I think it's a lot of work in terms of volume of objects. But I thought my team did a great job negotiating that space, and the sort of pacing and the sort of moves that we made structurally and didactically I think, support the work well. There's also the Afrofuturist Period Room, which is a nice space that has now been on view for maybe 2 years or so, and that is like jam-packed, very dense, but really important positioning, I think, to think about what the period room of the future could look like. And then, I don't know, I think there's a lot of small pockets of the Met that are permanent, in quotes I say, but that are always worth exploring. And no matter what your mood, you could go to, spend time in the Chinese gardens, or like, the blue sofa in the Goya room in the Lehman wing, which is great for naps, by the way. So it can just really suit whatever mood you're in.
Yeah. Now, what about, you've got that full run of Lester Beale posters in the
Art for the Millions is great
Yeah.
too. I mean, I could do the whole run down.
Okay, so there's plenty to see there. And Hilary, how about the Whitney?
I would go see Henry Taylor,
Yeah.
which is on our
Correct
5th floor
answer.
right
That was
now.
a great show.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
yeah, correct.
Ruth
answer.
Asawa was awesome.
There's also Ruth Asawa on the 8th floor.
Yeah, no, it's I can't tell you what a thrill it is to have those institutions in New York, and what a thrill it is for us to have you on our sofa. So please thank Hilary, thank Alicia for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.